Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, no matter where you are in the world. Welcome to a new session of Neos Education Science Seminar Series. And today we are going to have two talks. The first one is from Annabelle, and Annabelle won an honorable mention in the other category for a fantastic salt roulette. I'm going to talk through a process in a sec. The second talk is from Dawky, and he won an award here in the category Avatar with his Josie MK2 avatar, a creation with his friend Jeff Onyx. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Annabelle. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for the people in Twitch. And thanks for the people here in Neos. Annabelle, you have the floor.
Thank you. All right, so as you said, I am Annabelle. I was the creator of Salt Roulette, MMC 2022 Honorable Mention, category Other. What Salt Roulette is a party game that... First things first, I am Annabelle Fuchs. I've been programming for about 13 years, C, C++, C#, LSL. Most of my stuff nowadays I do primarily in C++. Experience is based around rendering, small games here and there, and of course, let me turn this off real quick. Second Life, which is where I got my start when making things for virtual platforms. In addition to that, I do some 3D modeling, some of the edits on this avatar I've done myself, and I'm generally just overall pain in the side of everybody that I know. But after this entire presentation, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, they can contact me at hello@kangaroo.club. But yes, before we begin, I'll give a special thanks to Raptor Annam. He was my project partner for Team Salt Powered, which is what we entered as when creating the game. He's the one actually convinced me to join Neos after many attempts, and it's also the one who did all the model and texture work for the game. So every bit of every model, every texture, every normal map, everything was done by him. He was also a major, huge help for anything related to logics and components that I didn't know, especially the components. The guy knows components like the back of his hands, and at the time, I barely knew anything about them. Oops. So, what is Salt Roulette? It's a Russian roulette themed party game with a twist. It encourages vindictive play into where it's not more than just normal Russian roulette, which is just, okay, you have the gun, you click to see if you win or lose, and you pass it on. There are much more in-depth mechanics and play in it to make things more interesting and engaging for the players. If anybody has any interest in it, there is a public folder available within the Toys and Gadgets folder that everybody has by default in Neos, under Toys and Collections by White Moon Fox, Minigames, and Salt Roulette. So if anybody wants to play it after this, and you want to get on Neos, you can spawn it out, play with friends. The more people there are playing it, the more crazy things get. So challenges straight out the date is gate. I joined Neos all of 3 days before MMC 2022 began. So I had no prior knowledge of the platform whatsoever, aside from the fact that it was VR, and that was it. I didn't know how extensive it was. I didn't know anything about the toolset. Didn't know anything about logics or components. All I knew is there's this competition coming up. Do you want to get in it? Okay, sure, yeah, I'll come in. We started going forward with it. So right off the gate, it was just sink or swim. In addition to that, I didn't have any access to VR. Everything had to be done via PC, which can be quite painful when you're dealing with gigantic graphs of logics. In addition to that, Windows 11's bugs. There's actually a very annoying bug, specifically Windows 11 in Neos. It's an issue on the Windows 11 side, but like if you have a monitor and your secondary monitor is rotated vertically, Neos does not like that at all. It will hiccup every single second, and your inputs will stutter as well. So I have all the fun memories of me sitting here in PC with my laser out, trying to put a node on a red print, which is a tool that I'll get into later, and then from zooming in, stutter, and it will just teleport behind it like 4 feet out. And then I try to zoom back in, teleport forward right into my hand. So that was a very fun experience. But hopefully that gets fixed at some point. Of course, there's another issue with time differences between me and Raptor Annam. We're both in the same time zone, but he stays up a lot later than I do, and I work a normal 9 to 5, where he does not. So the time frame that we were actually able to work together on things was narrower than I would like to have been, but there's only so much that you can do about that. But we managed to get a lot done regardless. And of course, the biggest issue, no array or list support in Neos. You can imagine when you're dealing with a dynamic buffer of users that can shift, inserted, removed, as players join and leave, that can be very, very painful. But there are some neat little tricks that I did that I will actually be going over here on the technical side of things that other people might be able to make use of. But yeah, basically we had to emulate a lot of the array and queue and stuff like that in order to make it work properly. So the boons right out the gate were logics actually followed standard paradigms and naming conventions. An if statement was an if statement. It acted like an if statement. A while loop was a while loop. It acted like a while loop. Operators were the basic operators. Add, subtract, mod, etc., etc. Everything was there that you expect. There were, of course, the Neo-specific things like the Boolean counter and various things like that and all the different nodes. But fundamentally, if there was a node that I didn't know, I could figure out a way to implement what I wanted to if I didn't know a node already existed for it, because all of the basic building blocks were there. It was very easy to just get off the ground running because of that. And I love logics because of it. There's not any craziness or anything like that you have to go too deep into. As long as you understand the basic building blocks that's standard in most programming languages, you can just get started and make nice things. In addition to that, the wiki documentation was very good for everything but the most niche options. I spent almost all my time with the wiki over on the other monitor, looking up every single thing that I could not to learn specific nodes that were specific things that I wanted to do. And since then, and even to now, I got to say the documentation is very well done. The team has done a good job keeping that up. There are still very niche things that do not really have too much documentation, and hopefully that will change in the future. But those are like the things you might use maybe one out of a 200 times, and you can figure those out based through experimentation. Now, procedural meshes made it very easy to build and test a proof of concept before having to worry about any model work. So we can just go ahead and get the base system working, have a fully functional game without having to worry about any art assets right off the bat. So very programmer art friendly. Redprint by Yukilops, amazing tool for dealing with logics and managing logics. I do all my coding via Redprint. And of course, Raptor Annam, as I mentioned earlier. If there's ever a question that I had in regards to a component or a node, he would be there to answer it. So the design and mechanics, making things fun, maybe, possibly. So if we just condense down everything, it is a Russian roulette themed game. But when you think about Russian roulette, it can basically be genre simplified as competitive gambling. And I'm pretty sure there are quite a few people out there that are raising their eyebrow, like competitive gambling. No, that's not competitive gambling. That's poker. That's stuff like that. But the reason why it seems so strange is because the mechanics for it does meet the genre of competitive gambling when you think about it, but it's very, very weak. Like the core player experience is rather passive. It doesn't really take much from the player to actually play the game. It doesn't take much thought to play the game. The gambling aspect ends as soon as you start. As soon as you sit down at the table and you are playing, there's nothing else the player does at all other than just pull the trigger, pass on to the next person. Everything is set in stone as soon as they sit down. And because of that, the competitive aspect is weak. You're just sitting there to see if you win or lose. That's it. There's no direct engagement with other players. It's just, am I going to win or am I going to lose? And that's it. So it's like a slot machine, except more boring. It may have that initial ooh, this is Russian roulette. Let's try it again. But chances are, after the first time, people aren't really going to be trying to play it again afterwards. The initial shock value is gone. It's therefore forgotten. So it's not roulette. The mechanics are a little more in depth to try and make it to where, like, when you see the table, you want to jump down into it. You want to play the game. You want to sit there with 6 people on there and scream and laugh at each other as things happen. So the thing is, so that's fun factor. How do we actually boost it? And that is through player engagement. Player engaging with systems is actually what makes it fun, and seeing the reactions from them engaging those systems. So, pull. Simple concept, you pull the trigger. That's it. But when you think about it, you can actually do a lot more with that. Regular Russian roulette, you pull the trigger once, you pass. So roulette, you can actually pull the trigger as many times as you want before you pass. On paper, it just says, okay, well, you can pull the trigger as many times as you want and pass. Okay, what to do? But when you look at it a little bit deeper, it actually makes it a little bit more interesting. Every single pull after that is actually a gamble. It's no longer just you sit down and that's the end of the extent of the gambling aspect of it. Every single pull is a gamble, with a possible payoff of every single other player losing. I pull once, well then that's safety net. But if I pull 2, 3, 4 times, and I'm still alive, the next person next to me is more likely to be eliminated. While I'm sitting here and I feel good when that happens, player next to me is feeling stressed when that happens. 2 players are having 2 different scenarios and both are very engaged in it. What's that player going to do? Are they going to try and respin? Are they going to try and eliminate me for trying to set them up? It's all these small little things that add up. So while on paper, it looks very simple. Just, oh, you can pull the trigger as many times as you want. Or involved into it in regards to how players interact with each other. Oops. The respin aspect. This was mainly just a way to get players a get out of jail free card or a safety net. Basically, if somebody pulls a trigger like 4 times and they pass it over to the next person, the person has a coin flip chance of it being the loaded chamber or the non-loaded chamber. Okay, well then, what if they don't want to pull the trigger? What if they don't want to risk elimination? Well, then they have the respin option, but you can only do it once per game. So they know they have the safety net, so therefore they are willing to take risks, or possibly be even riskier. But at the same time, if they do a respin, it provokes a response from all the other players of, seriously, they are not happy that person copped out, basically. They decided to be a coward, so to say. And not the best terminology, but it's the best one I can think of at the moment. But when you have that, it's another instance of you are provoking responses from players. Players are interacting with each other. Everybody's laughing. Everybody's dogging on each other, et cetera, et cetera. So just a small, simple thing can result in a pretty big outcome, similar with the multiple pull prices. Elimination is a thing that anybody can do at any time. You could do it on 1 pull. You could do it after 5 pulls. If you do it after 5 pulls, you know that chamber is loaded. Whoever you choose to eliminate is going to be the person that gets killed. But there's more to it than that. If they fail, and that's not the loaded chamber, they are instantly eliminated. So with this mechanic introduced, every single player has something to work towards. That payoff of getting the chance to just eliminate your friend next to you. To laugh at them and them going, oh no, come on, seriously, et cetera, et cetera. And it just provokes really good responses from all the players around. Every time I get an elimination, everybody around me, they scream and holler. It's overall just everybody having fun. But the other aspect of it is elimination is not limited to that person. Every pull I press increases my chance of elimination, but also increases the next person's chance of elimination. So similar to before, if I press 4 times and I pass it over to the next one because I don't have a respin and I want to risk it, maybe they want to risk it. I basically set them up for a high chance to turn right back around and eliminate me. The vindictive betrayal play comes into play there. Actually, the whole entire game is based off of betrayal and vindication because you're trying to set up everybody else to lose so you win. or you try to set it up to where you can directly eliminate everyone, so you win. All these mechanics together create a pretty nice hodgepodge of interaction and engagement. So you morph over from the concept of just Russian roulette, you have the gun, press trigger, you pass, to, okay, do I want to pull this multiple times? I want to set them up, but do I want to pull it multiple times? Or do I want to eliminate? Actually, you know what? It's been pulled too many times now. Maybe I want to respin. Actually, because it's been pulled too many times now, maybe I do want to eliminate. All these things come into play and are engaging. The player plays the game, they're enjoying it, they're having fun. So, major shift from basic Russian roulette to salt roulette. Now, this part right here, I'm actually going to go into a little bit of the more technical and architecture aspect of things. Similar to how I mentioned earlier, in regards to like how there is no array or list support, basically had to build our own queue from scratch. And but first things first, we're going to go over the game state. Everything is organized via a state machine with 4 main states: waiting, starting, changing, and playing. Waiting is the default state. It has nothing to do with any gameplay whatsoever, so all the state logic is completely decoupled from each other. So you met one state, doesn't break another state. And that basically keeps track of players that are sitting on the table, as well as their ready states. Once all their ready states and all that stuff is set up, and it detects, okay, 4 players, 4 people ready, it shifts over to the starting state. Starting state just populates the active player list from the list of players. There are 2 separate lists, and there's a reason for that. And also sets up all the gameplay specific on the variables, as well as the global mechanics variables, such as each player's individual respin count, and etc. Such things as that. I keep saying etc. a lot. Changing, pretty self-explanatory. It just shifts the players list so that it creates the concept of next player coming over. And playing is the actual play state that actually opens up controls and locks them over to the current active player. Now, if we go a little bit to the other things, this is actually one of the neat things: events handling. So, all events were decoupled from the core game system and handled and triggered through dynamic impulses. Basic one-off effects were all one way. Core game system tells the effect system, hey, play this sound, for example. Okay, it plays the sound. There's no need for anything else after that. But more complex systems that actually required a sync handshake were a bit more involved. And to give an example of what we did here, I actually have a little bit of a overview. So, starting off the bat with a very, very, very basic concept here, we just have the green representing basically the start of the impulse and 2 booleans. If we go forward, very first thing we want to do is write both booleans to false, because we want all the state to be completely clear as we go into the handshake. After we write the false, we send the impulse over to the effect system saying effect start. Now, that could be in regards to the changing effects or the starting effects or gun effects or explosion effects or whatever effects. There are different impulses for each type of effect. But in this context, I went backwards. It's just this example. And after that impulse is sent, the game systems run their basic game tasks. So what is happening is this and all effects are running in parallel. Eventually, when the effects are finished, it will send off an impulse, and then the system will receive on impulse receive the effect end. And after it receives the end, what it will do is write true to one of the bools. So that bool right there acts as a flag saying the effects are done. That whole part's done. We don't have to wait on those whatsoever. And then after game tasks are done, we do the other write over to the other one. So once both of these are like to true, that right there signals, okay, the game tasks are done, as well as the effects tasks are done. We can continue onward, which is the reason for the fire on true. We do an AND gate there, check if those are true, and if they are true, therefore we know everything's good to go, and we continue on with the rest of what we're going to do. All effects were handled this way. Benefits. Made it very easy to work on both things at the same time. Rap was mostly working on the effect stuff. I was mainly working on the core engine. almost everything we could do is just, okay, I'm going to send this impulse. You send me this impulse. Okay, cool. And we're able to work almost independently. Downside? Over-engineered. Very over-engineered. The amount of time I probably spent on over-engineering on this thing is crazy. Be very careful of over-engineering and bike shedding. I'll actually mention that multiple times in the duration of this. Well, I'm running low on time. Next thing is the player list. Mentioned before, doesn't have support for any arrays at list, so making a list of players is non-trivial. Both the active player key and the active player index had to be tracked. Because the key, you want to reference the key to make sure that like the controls are only being pressed by whoever the active player is. And also, you need the index to be tracked because the index is actually how we decided which chair certain effects would be for. Because player index 1 would be in chair 1, and the effects would have that particular index. Not the most ideal thing, but it's what we ended up working with. It went through to, that's my timer. It went through 2 implementations. And with a third one planned for the future. First one was a circular queue. The active player index was always the value of active player 0. So first things first, we needed 6 dynamic variables of users, as well as 6 dynamic variables of integers, which would actually act as the active player index. And then when we're actually going through and we start the game, we detect which ones are actually true and actually ones are false, and we store those sequentially down the list of active player indices. Then all we have to do is just get a Boolean counter over there to store the active player count. So when somebody leaves, for example, say active player 1 decides they had enough and they just jump out. Well then, what will actually end up happening here is we shift it upward. There was supposed to be more involved here, but unfortunately we don't have support for animations with the PowerPoints. But basically what it does is a while loop, which is the while loop using the amount of players and the actual index of the player that was moved to shift every single player down 1 up, or 1 down in this case. And it will continue that until it reached the end. So then you just have this exact queue right here, limited there with the active player count equaling just 5. And of course, active player 0 is still the active player index. But what was neat about this is we could use the exact same thing for changing turns, because what is changing turn but taking that active player 0 and putting it to the end? So we just shift it down, shift those back up. The exact same system as the exact same system that for handling people leaving can be handled for people changing turns as well. It worked pretty well, but it was over-engineered. The second one was a basic while loop iteration. Not the best thing in the world, and it resulted in a lot of crashed worlds, but all it was just going through each list, seeing if it was null, and if it isn't null, make that the active player index. Nowhere near as fancy, but at this time, we were kind of speed running, because I basically had to do a rewrite of a lot of systems, and we were running out of time. So I just went with whatever I could. Both implementations were bad. One because it was over-engineered, the other one because it was just basic while loop. And while basic while loop may think, oh, it's just a while loop, how could that actually just be bad? It didn't. There was a lot of things in there that could have been done better. So for future implementation, this will actually be done in a future version of it. Instead of having the 6 player dynamic variables there, we're actually going to make use of components. The very thing I didn't know anything about, because we can actually just use a reference multiplexer right there off the bat. And via the reference multiplexer, all that's already handled for us. There are our variables. And we have an index already stored in there and a target there for the active player. All of it's right there within a component for us. we would just have the active index be a dynamic field, which the difference between a variable and a field is a variable is a variable, but a field is referencing an existing field, which in this case, we are referencing that index. And the active player will be what as targeting. So whatever the value is in the multiplexer right here, based off of what the index is, will be the value of active player. So then, all we gotta do is say, okay, well, the index changed, fire on change. Is the active player true? Continue. The active player false. Just increment the active index, mod of the amount of players, and that's it. Because you change it, it'll fire on true again. And it'll keep going until it finally reaches that player. So it's like the while loop, except nowhere near as many moving parts here. Another thing of note, though, is we do still need to actually be able to change these values. And that's where these right here come back into play, but not as dynamic variables, but as dynamic fields, similar to the active index. And we have a write back thing right here that allows us to actually write to the values within the multiplexer. So this right here makes it to where we can still write directly to the multiplexer based on who sits down in a chair and who stands up. And all that just flows perfectly fine. And I'm out of time, so I'll try and speed this up. The takeaway is the components are very, very powerful. I wish I had known about them sooner. Now that I do know about them, I use them for almost everything. Beware over engineering, because it takes up a lot of time. Probably could have been used for better effects and better like niceties. Beware bike shedding. I spent a lot of time making that queue work when there's no reason to have that advanced of a queue in something that we're supposed to try and make in a month. I need to sleep more. Way more. I think when I did the rewrite, I coded for like 13 hours straight. And overall, Neos is the best platform for creative figuring I have found, hands down. I have made things for many different things. I've made things Second Life for like 10 years, and Second Life comes nowhere near to the capabilities of Neos. Matter of fact, in the time we were here, I made this slide system in all of 20 minutes. Well, actually, probably more like 30, 40 minutes. But because the current one that we have that's actually behind this was not functioning at the time. This power right here is absolutely crazy what you could do in here, so long as you put in the time to learn it and have the patience to figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. And a few of us were here early on when and it was very fascinating to see Annabelle building off the bat, that, presentation tool with absolutely zero lag time. Amazing to see a new user coming in and being able to pull out this kind of piece is just amazing. Without further ado, let's move to our next talk and keep your questions for the end. We will have 10 minutes, to ask Annabelle and Dawky questions. But let's move on to Dawky for his presentation on his Joe C. M. Key 2 avatar. Dawky, you have the floor.
Hello, I am a little short, so I shall change into the avatar which I've made for MMC. Give her a little bit to load. I didn't quite get the time to optimize this one. This here is Josie Mark II. A concept I've been, I guess, playing around with in my head for a little bit on a series of avatars I've been wanting to make. Kind of Android-esque. Last MMC 2021, I was making an avatar for my first ever MMC entry. Sadly, I never got to finish it. It was just going to be a regular Android girl. I was going to do some mechanical limbs hanging off the back. And I made the base model. I made some generic clothing and sadly never got to finish the project. I named her Lucy. LU-C, named after the first human. Now, 22 came around and I thought, this time I'm going to start. I'm going to go from day 1 to day 0 or day end, completely finish this one. So I'm like, right, well, let's try Lucy Mark II. I started as every, I guess, model does in Blender, a default cube. I would shrink it down, subdivide, loop cut. I never touched the sculpting tool. I just grabbed each vertex and moved it around until I was happy with the outcome, adding random shapes, etc. A couple of days got into the competition. I've already got the basics of a head and torso. And I remembered I have a good friend in the Japanese community who's just into robotics, just as much into robotics as I am. Sorry, I'm still waking up. And I remembered he is an absolutely amazing modeler. I wonder if he would like to collaborate with this. I showed him my idea. It was going to be just a simple android girl, but using realistic joints. Now, something I often see in VR avatars is often they'll use ball joints or organic weight painting, and it looks cool. It definitely looks like, it fits the avatar. But in my head, having a mechanical history growing up with spanners in my hand, I'd always forever look at them and go, technically that wouldn't work. That doesn't make sense. I would love to make a system that looks like it works. So, as we got working universal joints, something similar to what you would find in a car's differential, like the tail shaft. And this is what we wanted to heavily emphasize on. The moment I showed him my concept idea, he was all in. Being on the Japanese side of Neos, our language is a little bit, how could I put it? A bit different. So there was obviously some misunderstandings when we were explaining ideas. So over the course of a couple of weeks, instead of just saying, I want to, this design, etc., we would show images. We would be in Neos as well. Model something in Blender, bring it in, get a rough idea from it. And so over that time, we collectively made this. Now, I sent him the rough idea of the universal joint. It was just a cube, couple cylinders, some bevel cuts. He sent me back these wonderful joints that I have placed in almost every joint of this avatar, utilizing them where I could. There was a couple of things that were definitely roadblocks. Language barriers being one of them. But the other was just really trying to figure out how these joints will work. I'm not tech savvy. I'm not going to lie. I don't know much about programming, components, game engines. I'm a 3D modeler. So I understood the rigging aspect of how these would work. Yes, each part would need to have a certain bone. Each part would need to follow certain axes. My problem was when I got in the game. Like, I can just unpack a couple rotations. That only needs to move on the y-axis, etc. The moment I got all that hooked up, I realized quickly that we're going to be dealing with quaternions. It was flipping around. It was doing everything I didn't want it to do. I recorded. I showed JPhonics. He, for some time, was even looking into the mathematical formulas, the degrees, the rotations, all that kind of stuff of how a universal joint works. Little time passed, and it just clicked in his head, and I could see it in-game. The look at component. All of this is running off a look at component. Every joint, every piece of the joint. It's being told, shoulder piece, look at elbow, but only move on X rotation. So we realized quickly that component will do all of the math for us. Something I'm really proud of an outcome being a complete fluke was this elbow joint. Now, with the elbow joint, it's got a pneumatic pump to extend and compensate for the arm's length. A common thing with robotics and Neos is they'll like to separate from the joints. When I was designing it, I wanted this centerpiece, this end piece of my upper arm, just to rotate. That's all, just to rotate. And being connected to the forearm, when it wants to separate, it actually creates a pneumatic pump style extension. By complete fluke, we compensated arm length. I am really happy with that. Now, this is actually an unfinished avatar. We have basics down. We've got the main avatar. We've got the joints working. We've got the materials. We've got the face tracking. We never got to finish the mech. And this is where the power of Neos comes in. We would constantly bring in models and get ideas. So right now, I shall import the mech that Jphonics made in roughly a week. Now, bear in mind, Jphonics also worked on 3 other MMC entries during this whole time. The idea was an exoskeleton, something similar to what you would see in the movie Aliens. So as I was designing pieces of this, he was designing this. And we were constantly making sure that our art styles, our designs, they would flow together. Now the orange, that was a color concept we had halfway through, and we quickly realized if we used it white, people can change the colors to whatever they want. And I've already had a few inboxes over Discord with people showing me their own custom variations. And honestly, I did not expect that, and I'm really glad. So this is definitely something we'll be coming back to. Jphonics is an absolute machine, no pun intended, when it comes to hard surface modeling. I was not expecting this, and to be honest, it was a little hard to keep up in some times of the month. I was worried, I wonder if he can do this so quickly. What about myself? And things like that did eventually happen. I modeled everything on this avatar except for the joints and the hands. That was all Jphonics. Those parts I was getting pretty much art block or artist's block. I modeled the generic parts of the fingers, just the main parts of them. Started on the palm, and my brain was empty. For about 24 hours, I was messing with random shapes, and I couldn't get the idea. I informed Jphonics, and he more than happily designed a pair of hands that fit the entire theme and even fits with the mecha. Now, I mentioned at the start that this avatar was originally going to be called Lucy Mark II, after the first human. Now, coincidentally, my little brother had his firstborn baby on the first day of MMC, and her name is Josie, Josey. Now, a few days have passed, and he finally comes over and informs me I get to see the baby, and I realize, I'm like, oh, she was born on the first day of MMC. I wonder, is it a very similar name? Yeah, why not? I'll run with that. So we decided on Josie. Now, while we were hanging out, doing the brotherly things, he kind of just we both watch a lot of anime, and he looks at me and he goes, have you ever seen JoJo Bizarre Adventures? I'm like, you didn't name your daughter after a JoJo reference. He did. So her nickname's JoJo for short. Now, I informed Jphonics of this, and we had a giggle and we've realized, okay, so this is a JoJo reference. I forget what he calls it, but the mecha itself is also named JO-etc. So together it is JoJo. So this is all one big JoJo reference in the end. Now, I will be coming back to this avatar. I do plan on optimizing it. This is roughly, I want to say, 120,000 polygons. Now that is a lot when we're talking avatar. It's definitely not the largest number I've seen, but it's not something I'm comfortable with people running around in public with. Now I'm using things like 4K textures to show off hand-drawn panel linings, that kind of stuff, because I wanted to really emphasize on we are creating the, kind of show off what we can do. So I will definitely go back to this. Now, it's mainly due to hard surface modeling. So, for example, these hands, I would love to drop the quality of these hands. Well, not the quality, but the amount of polygons in these hands. But they're about 20,000 each. So there's definitely a lot of optimization loss in detail. And that is definitely something I'm going to address. And with that being said, I'm just relatively happy that this came out the way it is. And to be honest, Jay Phonics and I did this completely for fun. We had days where we would have breaks. As I said earlier, he was working on 2 to 3 other MMC projects modeling. So definitely gave him a break while I sat down in Blender myself for a few hours. And another premise, so the main goals with this was showcasing universal joints. We can definitely make a working robotics, or something that looks like it's working robotics with the systems we already have. Our limitations to the IK, this means that we can do it in different places. The second one being a learning experience for other people. A lot of things on this I would love for people to pull apart and learn. For example, the material. No one pays attention to the materials often when it comes to something basic, but something I've strived for in our Toon shader is matte cap and emission masking. That is something that is borderline impossible to do with that shader. I have figured out various ways to optimize. It's not as optimal as a single material, dare I say, but it's not stacking materials. My skin tone on my face is separate from the shininess of the black, even though they share the same UV wrapping. They're technically 2 different materials, allowing me to have a seamless transition between the 2 materials. Yet you're not noticing polygons being jagged, etc. The same goes for the emissions coming down to the eyes. What I've done is I am actually only duplicated those polygons that are needed and around the face where they're needed, and I'm overlapping materials, essentially forcing my own Z-fighting in its own mesh renderer. And this is a more optimal way to do like a material stacking, which you see often and can be done rather well. And the third really was just a little something different. I've wanted to make something that's, I guess, a piece of all of my avatars. It's got the robotics that I love in my androids, cyborgs, etc. But it's also got aspects from other avatars and other characters I love, inspiration, design. So, for example, the little rabbit I came on stage with. I actually repurposed these hips into that current avatar. The piping and the metalwork, I've had that for quite some time, and I wanted to carry that over into this. I've pretty much just made a few cylinders, and again, I like to say that when I'm making a model, I'm just slapping shapes together and it turns out alright. And that being said, I'm just glad that I guess other people have enjoyed this work as much as we did making it. Because it was a hell of a trip. That's definitely for sure. And I did not expect to get a finalized avatar, let alone competition winning one. And Yes, that's where I'll finish up from here. I'm just happy that we finished it and we had fun.
Thank you, Dawky. Excellent talk. Oh, you can stay on the stage, please. And I'm going to call also Annabelle to join you on stage for our little Q&A session now. So if Annabelle can join Dawky. Thank you very much for both of you on two different talks and as exciting one from another. And very interesting to see how two people with two different set of expertise can, very fascinating to see what two people with different set of expertise can do in Neos. I mean, this is just mind-boggling. So thank you for demoing your creation for us. All right, I'm going to take some question now from the floor and in Twitch from our audience in Twitch. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I have my little Twitch chat monitor here, so I can monitor any questions coming from the Twitch audience. Who would like to start? Yes, in the background here.
Hi, Annabelle. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess my question is, is the Salt Roulette an already established kind of game with that kind of function, or did you come up with all of the gaming mechanics, like the buttons and everything like that?
In regards to it being established, it was already established, but I also am the
Okay.
one that created it as well. It was a game I had already made on Second Life, but none of those assets or anything like that were used in any way in the version made for MMC. So the only thing that carried over was basically the concept and the idea, as well as other new ideas that came over, such as I didn't have the time to show it here, but like when an elimination fails, there's actually a gigantic shotgun arm that pops out of the center and like intimidates the person who tried it and failed. That didn't exist in the Second Life version or anything like that. But yeah, the answer to both questions is technically yes. It was already established, but I was the one that established it.
Nice. And also, did you do any tests with people while you were there, or you were pretty much relying on the gaming experience as it had played out in Second Life?
I was a little bit of both. We did have quite a few testers that helped out here. It was more so just in regards to finding bugs and stuff, because you can't just translate straight from one platform over to the other. Second Life's scripting system is very limited compared to what Neos is capable of, but it's also, because there's so much more you can do, it's much easier to break things accidentally. All it takes is one stray while loop to bring an entire world down and crash everybody in it. There's a reason why everybody jokes about, like, oh, you use a while loop? It's just like hissing, because they're like, no, please don't. Because they're very easy to break, and I broke things many times. But yeah, the gameplay stuff was solid based on the interactions in Second Life. Everybody that played it in Second Life loved it. And over here at Neos, testing it out with the crowd here, because you're going from a pure third-person perspective where people actually click with a mouse to VR. That's one aspect we had to take into account, as well as, like I said, the new platform and having them test it and everything like that. So it's a combination of both, basically.
Thank you.
Next question. I have a question actually for both of you. I mean, going through an experience which is relatively intense, you have to create these incredible games and avatar in a matter of only a few weeks. It's just about a month. There was a lot of work involved in making those creation, and both of you mentioned that it managed create bit and pieces to do things very efficiently. Joint for Dawky, Annabelle, you discovered that component could do everything you wanted to do for some of the part of your game. And as you design these things, seems to me that you can there is a lot of offshoot that you can extract, and those offshoot become objects that are self-contained. Could be, for instance, the joint that Dawky was talking about, and I can see that joint that you have created being reused for so many different purposes. So I understand that you have plans, to optimize the avatar and perhaps optimize the game as well. But do you plan to release, some of those small components that you have created and can be reused by other creators?
Making the joints public was actually never crossed my mind. I thought with the idea being of this public, people can use a dev tip and see how I made it. But that raises a very valid point. I think it might actually be a good idea if I just create the joint itself. Maybe even use the joint component so people can physically grab it and see how it moves around. I might actually try that.
Right.
Good idea.
Okay.
And for
Annabelle,
Salt
yeah.
Roulette, that was actually one of the reasons why I stress so hard to have the effects logic decoupled from the game logic. Because the effects logic also basically encompasses everything view related. So the actual guns, the actual table, the actual chairs, everything like that. In the end, though, it was actually more over engineering. I love using that word, don't I? But despite all that, like even with a new thing, using components, stuff like that, you can, there are other components, such as virtual parenting, copy global transform, various things like that, that honestly make it very easy to kind of create like a config-like setup where you just drag and drop things over. Because the idea I originally had was to make it to where, like, if we wanted to make different themed tables, we could. The one that we saw up there in the slides, actually, can I spawn the one right here real quick?
Sure.
Okay, let me just, here. So this one, I disabled my laser. This one right here is themed very specifically. It looks like something you expect to see in Las Vegas. And for a lot of places, this works just fine, like a club environment. But say like you are at a sci-fi spaceship and you want it to actually be a laser gun or something, or you want some other theme that is very, very niche. The idea was to try and make it to where it's very easy to swap out the actual view and effects and stuff like that to put it in your own instead. And that's why the handshake thing was possible, because not possible. The handshake thing was emphasized because, okay, well, the game system's just waiting for an impulse. It doesn't care what is actually that represents the table. You could technically make the gameplay itself if you were really that crazy. But yeah, it'll actually be easier with the new stuff because components simplify it greatly. I would say maybe it's probably around maybe half to 1/3 the amount of complexity. Components are very, 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 very powerful.
Right. Thank you both. Any other questions? No question on Twitch. We are coming to the end of the hour. Well, join me to say thank you to both Dawky and Annabelle for two brilliant talks. Thank you both. In the next few days, we're going to have another meeting here, and I believe that Jason Moe is going to give us a presentation. And as you know, Jason Moe has been the brain behind the Meta movie, and I'm really looking forward for his talk. So keep an eye on our Discord Edu-Science channel for the precise time of the next talk. And we have already in the pipeline for the next few weeks a few talks coming from Amish team with some students' presentation. So thank you again, both of you, speakers, Dawky and Annabelle. Thank you for the audience here in Neos. Thank you for the audience in Twitch. And we see you next time in Neos. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.